Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I'll be providing my book review of the book Extreme Makeover by Dan Wells. This is the fifth Dan Wells book that I have read. I read his trilogy from the John Wayne Cleaver series, also known as the I Am Not a Serial Killer trilogy, featuring I Am Not a Serial Killer, featuring Mr. Monster, and featuring I Don't Want to Kill You. All of which are fantastic and superb books, and it instantly made me a fan of his. And I went and bought his book Ghost Station, which I have a review on the channel for. I actually have reviews for books 2 and 3 of the trilogy as well, although I didn't get the first one in because I read it right before I started the channel. But I loved this as well. I thought it was a very different book. This is an espionage book, whereas this is a horror, straight-up horror book trilogy. But it was all very excellently well done. And this book, Extreme Makeover, is like a sci-fi horror thriller as well. And so I'll break that down. But the way I describe this book as an entertaining freak show, or it is a balance between being amazingly masterful and utterly ridiculous. This one, as I wrote in my written review, is probably going to give me nightmares for years because it is disturbing, a lot of the stuff that happens in this book. So the first thing I'll say is that the book is so thematically dense, and throughout the review I will discuss all the deep themes. Some of the themes I won't be able to really give explicit reasons because it'll be spoilers, but I'll try to explain what the themes are generally without giving away what the book is specifically dealing with in the later parts of it. But it has so much deep themes, for sure the most of any Dan Wells book, and for sure it's up there in one of the most dense novels that I've ever read, period. It's such an interesting exploration of science, business, corruption, and basic humanity. So the first thing I'll talk about is how the book is structured and how I felt about the structure. It is set into 4 parts. The first part is called New You, the second part is called Makeover, the third part is called The Common Man, and the fourth part is called Rebirth. I thought that the first 2 sections, New You and Makeover, were amazing, spectacular, perfect parts. 10 out of 10 for both of the first 2 parts. I thought the part 3 was almost just as good. It just had a few things minor that I didn't like, so I gave that like a 9 out of 10. And then I thought the fourth part, Rebirth, was really well done. Not what I was hoping it was going to be, and I think it could have been done better and much different. And so I gave that a 7 out of 10. So still positive at the end, but not as strong as the first 3 parts. So overall, it's very, very high marks for this book. Incredibly well produced by Dan Wells. He should be very proud of himself for this book. But just note, it gets more and more ridiculous as the parts go on. Each section, the thing that's happening in the book gets bigger and more crazy, and the people are getting bigger and more crazy and what's happening, and it just gets more ridiculous and more horrific. And so note that when you're reading if you read the end of the book out of context, you would be like, this is just crazy. But if you read the whole book through, you're like, I see why he did that. If you don't know the premise, I'll discuss that briefly here. The premise of this book is that there's this makeup company called New You, which is working on developing a face cream for aging. However, something happens in the development of it where it accidentally creates a mutation that creates clones and other bad side effects. The book becomes an exploration of how governments and corporations and individuals all react to this development. You know, rather than simply focus on one, like just showing how the business side would handle it, it shows how all of them handle it. And so you see how the businesses become corrupt and see this as a potential way to make money. Governments see this as a potential way to make weapons. And individuals see it as a way to change themselves. And it deals with all the deep themes of all these areas. But it has a single main character, Lyle Fontanelle, who is our anchor. And by following Lyle, we really get to understand all these elements through his perspective, and he's the person who accidentally creates this. It's not on purpose, what happens in the book. And I'll say, as I mentioned, the premise for this book is fantastic. It takes in a concept of dealing with runaway corruption and creating mutation in something that causes mass panic, and it's very apocalyptic. This book is called Extreme Makeover, but it has a subtitle inside called Apocalypse Edition. And as you read the book, there is a countdown to the apocalypse. So you start at like 280 days until the apocalypse. And as the book goes on, you get slowly and slowly further into the apocalypse and see how the world is destroyed through this face cream. It is really bizarre, but it is such a cool premise. It just keeps going and getting more weird until the last act. The book explores really deep questions about why we have the bodies we have, and I think that is the strongest theme that the book deals with. Dan Wells explores this through characters with complex emotions and backstories. Several characters are overweight or have physical effects that make them considered by the general public unattractive. And this cloning ability gives them the opportunity to look like someone else, to look better, to have a better body, to be skinny instead of fat. And while there's an element of perhaps that's a good idea to make everyone more healthy, there's also the discussion of trade-offs. And there's the discussion of, yes, but should you have that body or not? And I think that the lesson that you come away with this, which I think is the right lesson, is that God made us exactly as we are meant to be. We have flaws, we have deformities. There are naturally things wrong with us, and our goal should be to make ourselves as best as we can. But we should do it embracing natural methods. Going to extremes to try to make ourselves better is not necessarily a good thing. Anything in an extreme is potentially bad. And sometimes embracing your physical flaws are good. And when some of these people in the book that are really overweight, they use this face cream that turns their body really skinny, there are side effects that they didn't realize were happening. And it makes you wonder, maybe they should have just stayed with the body that they had. So it's a really interesting exploration, and it's not hitting anyone over the head. There are different ways that the book explores these themes that I thought was really well done. The book also explores the more depressing angle of big corporations. The big primary antagonist for this book, for the majority of the book, is Big Pharma. Wells takes an incredibly cynical approach, I would call it, kind of saying that, showing what corporations would do at their absolute worst. And because of that, the book can seem very satirical at times. But it does show what potentially could happen if people let self-interest take control instead of their view of the greater good, thinking that the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. And so this could be considered one-dimensional by some people, but I really think that this was a good way, this is the right book to explore this in, and this doesn't just hit corporations, it hits individuals as well. And so it explores this from all potential angles. Just about everyone in this book is at the absolute worst they could be. Very few people are portrayed in the best light. Almost everyone is portrayed in the worst light. And so it shows what can happen when self-interest is the tantamount. And basically what it leads to is the apocalypse. And it's basically saying, don't be self-interested. The book also explores elements of gender ideology, and this is probably where Wells leaves the reader with the most interpretation. No matter where you believe anything on gender ideology, he doesn't make a point one way or the other. I know where Mr. Wells stands, and I know where I stand, and all that kind of stuff, but the book doesn't hit you over the head. You could read this book from one perspective and think he's making a point on gender ideology from there, but you could read it from the exact opposite perspective and get the opposite interpretation. So I thought that was very fascinating, the way that he tiptoed. I don't think anyone is going to be offended by what he wrote, but no one's going to be super excited that he wrote it the way he did. He's not going to anger anyone, but he's not going to make anyone happy. It was he tackled the issue, but in a very uncontroversial way. Getting into some of the characters, I really liked the main character of Lyle. Lyle was just a fascinating character because he's reacting throughout the book. He makes the thing by accident, realizes his mistake, and everyone is forcing him to go along with the crowd, go along with what Big Pharma's saying, go along with what the government's saying, go along with what other people are saying. And he's just trying to do his best to save this system and to fix the problem. And I really like the way that he has really low moments, he has really high moments, he has moments where he stumbles, but overall he has, I think, a good character, and I think that he's very fascinating to follow, and he has a good voice too. He's not just a cut and paste male protagonist. He actually has a quite good voice. There are also some themes regarding religious zealotry and regarding religion in and of itself. And in many ways, a lot of the religious people in this book are the people who realize the dangers of what's happening. They're the ones who have been schooled the most on apocalyptic scenarios regarding this stuff. And they're the ones who basically are trying to warn the world. And it's interesting because so often religious characters are portrayed so negatively by authors. And I know Dan Wells is religious, and he doesn't just make them the good guys, but he gives them some good moments, some good points, while at the same time showing that he does show the bad elements of religious zealotry, but he does show the good elements of religious individuals and what they can do for society. And there's some individuals who are trying to help others. There's some individuals who are trying to warn others about the bad things happening in this book. Normally, those religious characters are portrayed as villains almost, as one-dimensional villains, so it was nice that he gave them some nuance. And again, it's very minimal in the book. That element and the gender ideology are both incredibly small compared to the greater elements of the corporation's government and of individual self-interest. Those themes are high, but and throughout the whole book. But the elements of religion and gender ideology are maybe a couple of pages, if that. It's very small. I do have a few criticisms with the actual story, and my biggest was the last act. It got so ridiculous that I was just rolling my eyes the whole time. I understand why Wells led the reader to this place, and he had a purpose for getting us there. But I just thought that he went in a direction he should not have. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit the mic. If Wells likes his endings to be somber and sad, there are good elements of his endings in his John Wayne Cleaver trilogy and also in Ghost Station. But every single one of these books ends on a somber, sad note. A character, sometimes the main character doesn't get the love interest, or sometimes the love interest leaves, or sometimes the love interest dies, or the main character gets hurt, or someone near him, like a family member, gets hurt, or the main character loses their job, or the main character, all these different types of they destroy the villain, but still have some elements that take away. And it becomes, all his endings are just kind of sad. I don't feel happy after reading them. And this book is probably the most egregious example of this. And I don't particularly like that. I would have completely overhauled the last act if I was his editor and I could give him some suggestions. But then again, he had a very specific reason he was going in the direction. But I understand that, but I would have gone very differently. The book ending kind of has similarities to Jurassic Park that I didn't love. And also, I wanted something closer to 2012, the movie, and this had more of a Jurassic Park ending. If you read the book, you'll probably figure out what I'm referring to by that. Also, another criticism I had is that there are two female characters, both of whom are potential love interests for the main character of Lyle. And both of them are very interesting individuals. And one of them is his assistant at the beginning, Susan, and one of them is someone else who shows up later in the book named Lily. And both of them are very interesting characters. However, neither of them gets a ton of development, and as such, they feel split, and it doesn't feel rewarding, either of their endings. And I feel like if he had basically somehow smushed their characteristics into one character, omitted a few of the characteristics that were contradictory, but basically kept them at one character throughout, their ending with Lyle would have been a much more effective ending. But instead, each of them, I feel, is like half-baked, but they didn't get enough development as they should have. Lyle gets enough, but the two female characters didn't, which I wish that they'd had more singular focus, but they are split instead. So that was one of my other. There are also, I should warn, there are allusions to sexual elements, but they are very minor, and they're not, he doesn't go there like some authors would. He is like referencing things. So I like the way he handles it. He's very PG-13, obviously. There are occasions where he makes allusions to references to something. It feels much like Brandon Sanderson did with Warbreaker. That book dealt with some deep themes, but at the same time, some deep sexual themes, but it also dealt with them in an appropriate way. So I just want to warn that they're kind of there, but it's not a lot. If I can make a note really quickly before I end on the cover. This is not a comment on Dan Wells' writing, so this doesn't affect my review of the book itself. But I really think that they made a misstep with this cover. The way it's designed, the idea of the black cover with the white of the cream, and then you have the human body that's also kind of got DNA with it. The symbolism and the whole layering, it all works, but it just isn't designed well. And the side of the book and the back of the book, I think, are also weak for two reasons. One is the back of the book, it's almost impossible in person to read the writing because it's a white writing on a pink background with little black dots throughout. It's not as clear as it could be, and it would turn off people who are interested in reading the blurb if this was in a bookstore. That's the first main problem. The second is that this book, as it's titled, is called Extreme Makeover. That by itself is probably going to be very hard for some individuals, particularly male readers, which is already a harder demographic to get reading. It's going to be less likely to convince them to read the book. This has nothing to do with the TV show Extreme Makeover or anything like that. But they're already going to be potentially turned off by the title. When you add in a pink spine and a pink background, I think it's even less likely to entice them in. I think that if he had kept the black background, it's more neutral, it's more of a base color, and would have worked just fine. And also would have had the darker tones of the book, because the pink almost makes it seem light and fluffy, and it is not. It is a dark, dark, dark book. And so I just feel like the cover was a misstep, in my opinion. But it is eye-catching. Like, when I saw the cover when I ordered it online, I was like, that's interesting. When I saw it online on Amazon, I couldn't tell what it was trying to do. And then when I got the book in person, I was like, I see it now. So I think that they could have fixed it. There are some humorous moments in this book that really were delivered well. There is a certain point where characters are talking about actors, and a certain actor with a certain name is referenced. And it was so cleverly done that I was just dying with laughter. It was perfectly placed. And there's other humor as well throughout the book. But that moment, if you get to that moment where they're talking about actors and a funny actor's name shows up, you'll know what I'm referring to. But overall, I think that this is an excellently written novel. It's got great breaking points. It's got a superb pacing. I was reading it so fast because I just had to get it done. It was so superbly written and paced. There are elements in the fourth part that I don't really prefer, but I can overlook that for the overall scope of what the novel is trying to do. And for sure, it's the longest Dan Wells novel I've read. He may have other longer novels, but this is the longest I've seen. And it is thick, and he pours so much themes into this. It's his deepest book thematically, so I really like it. So for that reason, I give this book a 9.1 out of 10, and this is just, it's amazing how he just produces banger after banger. He's such a good author. And I want to say, Dan Wells, please go see someone because your brain is messed up. And so that's my review of the book Extreme Makeover, Apocalypse Edition. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts and comments. Did you catch the funny reference? What did you think of all the deeper themes involved? If you haven't read this book, are you interested in reading it? Do you have similar books that you recommend? Leave all those thoughts and comments down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.